Hello again, friends. Time for another In Other News 2013 edition. We were going to do a whole lineup of world leaders here at the onset of the new year and the new semester, and I do want to continue on that, but there's always a but. Lo and behold, as soon as I put out the very first one on our good friend Shinzo Abe, the new Prime Minister of Japan, he goes and does a whole bunch of crazy stuff in the last 24 hours, which is forcing me to go ahead and revisit his video bio right from the get-go. Because if you watch the last one on Shinzo, I reference that he's kind of center-right. The LDP, his political party, is kind of like conservative, kind of like Republicans in the United States, and that he himself and his group might be a little hawkish on foreign affairs, but, there's always a but, I suggested no, he wouldn't be crazy enough to be too hawkish or too right-wing on foreign affairs because really he wanted to focus on Japan's economy. He didn't want to destabilize their economy or stagnate their economy any further by jeopardizing economic ties with China or even South Korea, two of their biggest trading partners. And of course, there's been a fracas between China and Japan for over a year now on these Senkaku disputed islands off the coast of China, which are claimed and kind of owned by Japan. And they've been going back and forth about it. Diplomatic rows have occurred. People have been arrested. Chinese people have been trying to swim to the island, fly over the island. Some Chinese ships have actually been in the territorial water space of that island just this week. And so there's been this back and forth tit for tat about those islands that I thought for sure, no, Shinzo Abe will chill out about those islands because he doesn't want to piss off China. Because all the times that these diplomatic rows have occurred over these islands in the last year, it's actually affected Japan economically to the negative, meaning the Chinese leadership has whipped up the Chinese population into a furor over the Senkaku Islands to the point that Toyota dealerships and factories have been burned down in China, and people are stopping buying Japanese products, and Japan doesn't want that. China's a huge market. So I thought for sure, no way Abe would do the ixnay on pissing off China over these islands. And as is typical, I was totally 100% wrong. What's happened in the last 48 hours since I posted that podcast, for starters, the cabinet that Shinzo Abe put in, cabinet, much like the American president has his cabinet, well over half of the people that Shinzo Abe put in his cabinet are hawkish right-wing dudes. Now, again, not surprising. They're from the LDP political party in Japan. But on top of that, many of them have been cabinet ministers before or prime ministers before. So he didn't really look for a whole lot of new blood in the cabinet he put into place. Okay, well, so what, Boyer? So what, Professor? So he put in a bunch of old folks, former political colleagues into his cabinet. Well, just this, and I'm going to read from The Economist, which I don't often just read stuff, but this struck me as telling of what's going to happen in the Abe administration here in the coming years. Quote from the article that says, Back to the Future. I'll show it. I'm not making that crap up. Back to the Future. There's his cabinet right there. Shinzo Abe's in the middle of it. What they're referencing there with Back to the Future is Shinzo Abe has pretty much dusted off history and put it back into place. Usually never a good move when you want to go forward in the world. But here's a quote from the article that I thought was telling. Consider the following of the cabinet that Shinzo Abe just put into place. Consider the following. 14 in the cabinet belong to the League for Going to Worship Together at Yasukuni, a controversial Tokyo shrine that honors leaders executed for war crimes. Let me stop right there. I referenced that last podcast as well, and I said, no way Abe will go to this shrine in Tokyo that does honor Japanese dead soldiers and stuff, but also war criminals, convicted, tried, and hung war criminals. They're war criminals because they conducted crimes against humanity against Chinese and Korean people. So anytime a Japanese leader visits this shrine, it pisses off Chinese and Korean people. So let me restate it. 14 members of his cabinet are in a club, and the club is Let's Go to Yasukuni Shrine Club. That's not good for the bigger picture of Japanese-Asian relations. I'll continue in the same paragraph. 13 of these cabinet members support Nihon Kaigi, a nationalist think tank that advocates a return to, quote, traditional values and rejects Japan's, quote, apology diplomacy for its wartime misdeeds. Added, again, 13 of his cabinet members are now saying it's time for Japan to stop apologizing about World War II. We don't care. We are not going to continue to keep kissing the ass of the Chinese and the South Koreans. At least this is what their little club doesn't want to do. And these are the people who are in charge now of the major cabinet positions for the country of Japan. So that's problematic. That ain't going to please South Korean or Chinese people either. Let me continue. 9 cabinet members belong to a parliamentary association that wants the teaching of history in schools to give a better gloss to Japan's militaristic era. They deny most of Japan's wartime atrocities. End of quote. That's a big deal. The majority of Shinzo Abe's cabinet are what we'd call hawkish, right-wing conservative folks who are saying, we're tired of apologizing. We don't care about Japan's wartime criminal offenses. We don't care if it pisses off our neighbors. Hell, let's go to the Yakasuni Shrine knowing full well it's going to piss off our neighborhood. That's problematic. Okay, but that's the cabinet. I'm still going to go out on a limb and say Shinzo Abe himself will not visit the Yasukuni Shrine. There's just too much to risk here. Why piss off your biggest trading partners at a crucial time in world history where things are changing and China's rising and South Korea is no slouch itself? It's going to be a top 10 economy soon. Why would you risk that? Dig this. Here's the other thing that caught my eye of the last 48 hours. That was the cabinet. Now dig this. Yesterday it was announced by Japan's defense minister that they are going to spend $2 billion US dollars towards defense spending. First time they've had an increase in defense spending for over a decade in Japan. That is a very big deal. And how do you think China is reacting to that? I can tell you, it's this. Ah! The world is ending! Japan's militarizing! They're going to come kill us all! Now, that's China's typical and predictable overreaction. But there's something to it. Certainly, Japan, under Shinzo Abe and his administration, are taking a very forward, right up front, we're going to take our foreign policy in a much different direction and be a lot more hawkish. This is not a coincidence. Folks, they've been in office for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks! Upped the defense spending by $2 billion. That's a big deal. To their credit, or I should say in their defense. Get the pun talking about defense. In Japan's defense, in Shinzo Abe's defense, and his cabinet's defense, it's not just targeted at the Senkaku Island debacle with China. Certainly that's part of it. As I suggested, China has had Chinese ships now in the territorial water space around these islands this week, which pisses off Japan. They've had planes overfly the Senkaku Islands in the last couple months, which pisses off Japan. And Japan sees this really as it's a little group of rocks. It's really quite insignificant. But this is really a test of will at this point. Who will blink first? Who's willing to go to war? And if it seems far-fetched and fanciful that these two economic superpowers would go to war over a group of rocks, I would have thought it was laughable too a year ago, but it doesn't look that laughable anymore. I'm not laughing about it. The Chinese ain't laughing about it. And Japan, with this outright, full-on, we're going to spend $2 billion in increased defense spending, they're not laughing about it either. So, let me get back to their defense. The Chinese have been aggravating the situation. Sorry to my Chinese friends, but it's true. But Japan also has to worry about North Korea, which if you follow current events, you know that they successfully tested a rocket about 2 months ago. A rocket that has gone further and better and faster than any rocket they've done before. And possibly North Korea's possibly have nuclear or something they could put on this rocket. So it's not just China. It is China and North Korea. And for those of you that follow me or follow the class or know your history, you also might know this little tidbit that it's not just the Senkaku Islands that Japan has disputed with China. They have island disputes with South Korea as well, and Russia. That's right. Every single country that's near Japan, that are neighbors of Japan, they have territorial disputes with all of them. Russia, South Korea, and China. And North Korea. I don't know if they have a territorial dispute, but North Korea is freaking crazy, and they might have a nuclear weapon. And if North Korea were to ever launch at anybody, it would likely be Japan. So given all of the things that are happening here, I totally understand why Japan might want to boost its defense spending. But again, it's the first 2 weeks of this administration. This is a clear indication that they are not afraid and very open about going towards the more conservative, hawkish side of things, and are being much more pro-nationalist. That whole idea that a lot of cabinet members, and Shinzo Abe himself years ago, have said, we're tired of apologizing. We're tired of it. We might want to rewrite Japanese textbooks to make to have more national pride in our militaristic era where we almost took over all of Asia. That really pisses off their neighbors, but it's a very pro-nationalist move. It's rah-rah, Japan's awesome. So we're seeing this, I won't say lurch to the right, but a definite move to the right, a definite, I would say aggressive move, very forward. We are going to stand up for Japan's nationalistic pride, and we're going to stand up defense-wise to all of these challenges that we might face, and we're not going to capitulate here. So it's kind of a big deal. Now, who would be happy or unhappy about this? I don't know what the U.S. opinion is. I haven't read really too much about it. I would assume the U.S. might be happy about it because Japan probably buys a lot of defense weaponry from the United States. The U.S. is probably also happy about it because we kind of, I think, like Japan and all of these other entities in the Pacific to present a rougher, tougher edge to China, to check the growth of China. I can totally see that. So I don't know what the opinion is, but the U.S. also might want to be leery because what happens if China and Japan do go to war over this group of rocks? Is the U.S. then going to jeopardize its trade relations with China to go help out Japan? I don't know. You kind of make the assumption that maybe they would. But who knows? That's a tough call. It's a very tough call. Also, what's going on with the Shinzo Abe group, and why I'm pointing out the second podcast about him, is he actually probably supports rewriting their textbooks. He obviously supports a much more pro-nationalist, a strong Japan. And what was the one other thing? He actually has been in the past, and I believe currently is in support of perhaps changing Japan's national self-defense force to a full-on military, which would indicate he is wanting to change the constitution to allow for Japan's military to have aggressive offensive moves as well. Ever since World War II, they wrote it into their constitution they would only have a defense force. They could only defend from attacks. They could not openly and offensively attack somebody first. Shinzo Abe and his crew have made it quite evident, I think, they're willing to get rid of that. Now, whether that will happen, that'll have to go through the Japanese Diet, maybe even be a national referendum. But I'll bet you'll see it go forward during his administration, perhaps in the next 6 months. To end, what else is Shinzo Abe going to do to strengthen his position against China, against North Korea, and maybe even to buffer itself defensive and economically? They are definitely going to seek closer ties with the United States. I mentioned that last podcast. It is now quite evident from moves in the last week. He's also going to go out of his way to strengthen his ties with India, Australia, and the ASEAN countries. In fact, Shinzo Abe today, January 10th, is visiting ASEAN countries, and it's got it scheduled to go visit with India folks as well. It always frazzles China a little bit more if Japan can be successful in making a coalition of countries that are all around China who are democratic, who have more in common with Japan than they do with China, and of course the United States would probably support this move as well. That makes sense. Had to go give you a second podcast about Shinzo Abe, brand new Prime Minister of Japan, because he is definitely changing the tone and course of Japanese politics in a very big way right up front here in the first 2 weeks of him being in power. And it's interesting to watch this because knowing him and knowing what he's up to is going to help you predict the future of what's going on in that all-critical Pacific arena here on the world stage. That's all for now. Another world leader coming up tomorrow. Based on your recommendations, and your thoughts and questions and comments are always encouraged. But for now, we're out.